Sorry, I have to exit Google Chrome and save myself 1 billion gigs of memory.
Yep, there's like 30 million processors out there.
Oh my God. Teams. Agile teams. Yeah, let's talk about this topic. Agile teams. So the Scrum guide says every team you're on, product owner, Scrum master, it's going to take 20% of your time. Okay. Now this is a good topic because I just talked to my the product owner who's replaced me on a project. I just talked to him today. And I explained to them because he's not trained in any way, shape, or form. So I was like, when I'm gone, I was like, here's what's going to happen. People are going to start inspecting like your teams. I was like, this is what's going to happen. You're going to say, hey, there like when Brian started, there were 3 teams, 2.5 teams, but it's arguable. 3 teams. We'll call them 3 teams. It's really 2. When I started with the company, there were 2 teams. There was 2 teams. It's complicated. And now there are 5.
5.
There are 5. Yes. 4.5. We'll call them 4.5. Again, the other team is arguable. Listen, like for the purpose of me like building this up, like the other team is like a team with like 1 developer and 1 tester operating in like Kanban mode, and they just work on a little Kanban board, and they're super lightweight, and they always turn in their number of points, and they're very predictable, and they're no problem. I've co-opted one of my refinements to basically be like their sprint planning. And when their sprint ends, I just cut it off and begin the new one. It's just a Kanban team.
Sure.
Scrum or whatever, like some kind of hybrid model. But the only reason I'm using Scrum with that team is because I'm trying to not confuse the business. I'm like, we're all Scrum. These are our events, whatever. But in actuality, they're just a hardcore Kanban team. They just work on whatever as the priorities I set, and we do refinements, and we don't like. I do demos, but I roll their sprint review in with another team to do an entire program sprint review.
Yep.
But it takes them like 10 minutes to be like, hey, here's what changed in our product or whatever, and then they're done. So they go up first. That way that developer can just split. You know what I mean? Anyway, so they're like half a team. Okay, like they're fine. So when I say like 2.5 teams, 4.5, that's what I mean. But anyway, so when I started, we had 2.5 teams. Okay. And now we have 4.5 teams, and they want to bring on another 1 or 2 teams. They're not really sure. They have enough people to fill 2 more teams solid, okay? Because we're in a ramp period right now. The company's in a ramp period, and we want to get over this divide quickly and try to produce a bunch of software and go through whatever 18 months, 2 years, maybe a little more than 2 years, or whatever, and then ramp down and kind of maintain their product over it.
Sounds like you're going to end up at 6.5 teams.
Yeah, most likely we will. Likely we will. Yeah. So I'm preparing to separate now because I've set everything up, and as a consultant, I've set everything up, and I'm about to separate and leave, and then it's going to be up to them to carry things forward, right?
Yep.
So the conversation that I had this morning was, I was like, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen when I leave. People are going to come in who don't know anything about Scrum or whatever, Kanban, Agile, whatever. People are going to come in who are not trained, and they're going to be like, do you really need 2 hours, whatever, 4 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is for sprint planning? I mean, do you think you can get it done in an hour and a half instead of 2? And they're going to say, ooh, do you really need an hour and a half for your retro? Do you think you might be able to take that down to 45 minutes? And, do you really need this much time for? I'm like, listen, I was like, that is like when people come in to have that conversation, that is the wrong conversation. You need to tell them, what are you trying to get at? Okay, are you trying to load me down with more teams and try to get more productivity out of me? Is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to stretch one product owner to like 6, 7, 8 teams? Is that what the goal is here?
So most times the focus is on efficiency.
Yeah.
Right? They're saying, well, we need to make sure that people are utilized. Well, look at their utilization rates, right? And I think that's a fallacy because you can be super efficient, churning out code of dubious quality, et cetera, but you're not being effective, right? And here, what I'm talking about is where's the alignment of the product versus what the the business is really looking for in terms of value. So if you're delivering subpar compared to just being efficient, people are fully busy, et cetera, that metric is meaningless because it's not tied to the value. The other thing is those metrics can be gamed, right? You try and track efficiency, well, people are going to estimate their work higher. But again, it's detracting from that effectiveness of delivering business value, which should be the only measure that matters.
I can definitely tell you about gaming the system. Like I was an absolute pro when I was a team member, and somebody would come down with a dictate like that, like, oh, I need you guys to improve like your new KPI. That they used to love to do that with just irregular KPIs, just incorrect KPIs, like your team needs to produce 10% faster in the next year. I'm like, all right, dude, how are you going to track that? You going to track that by our velocity? Cool. Well, now 5s or 8s, and we're producing 20% faster.
Right.
Great.
Right.
Where's my bonus?
Yep, absolutely right. Anything like that, which is, I call them vanity metrics.
Yeah.
They really don't matter in the big picture, but people are just gravitated to that, right? Because they're efficiency driven and not effectivity driven. They really need to look at the value that the teams are providing. So, unfortunately, it's all too prevalent out there that people are focusing on, we're paying the teams, we don't make sure we get value out of them, just keep them busy. Well, look at the quality of the code that comes out,
Yeah, keep them like it. I do get the keep them busy thing. I get that from a project manager. I get that because I was on a couple projects, but I was on a project that lasted probably 18 months or so, 15, 18 months, something like that, where it was we had the product owner, but the product owner had a project manager that worked for him. It was a very weird environment. We're going to leave that alone for a second. And that was the project manager. That was her thing. The whole project, which was like, how do I know that everyone on your team has an equal distribution of work? I'm like, why do you care about that? What does it matter? Like if the team is like, let the team decide between them. Is like, hey, Bob, I think you've been like slacking or whatever, and I had to pick up your work. Like the team will figure that out. Like,
unfortunately, it's not very common where you see that kind of latitude provided to teams. People want to be controlling, right? And say if you left the teams to their own devices, they may just slack off. That's the fear, right? Whereas the reality is, if you're going to drive them all the time, they will get sick of it, and you're going to lose some valuable people. That's what it boils down to.
You're going to lose everybody over time.
Over time, yeah.
So change the teams. I brought this up because that was a conversation that I had this morning with my product owner. I was like, when they start asking you about this stuff, your response needs to be, my advice was, first of all, you need to go get training because you're not even going to know the questions to ask without training. Okay, I was like, well, once you have training, you'll understand on paper the way it's supposed to work, and you'll be able to see how it was when you came in to be like, oh, I actually had the benefit of this person who knew the book way of doing things and the actuality way of doing things, and like I didn't know to ask these questions, but like now that I understand that, I'll give you an example. One of the things he asked me was, he's like, there's 5 teams. There's 5 teams, but 2 of those teams are working out of one backlog, and 3 of those teams are working out of a separate backlog. So, I mean, they're really not. They could have different product owners and different Scrum Masters. They could be. Yeah. They're completely separate. They don't have anything to do with each other at all. At all. Completely nothing. They're completely separate products. They are hosted in the same environments. I guess that's the only thing that ties them together.
Right.
But now we're talking about release management. Like, we're not talking about development teams at this point. We're out of that, and we're talking about a different thing. So let's put that aside for a second. So what I told him was, each team will take 20% of your time. Okay, so I was like, it's worth starting the conversation with the business now we really need 2 product owners to have a stable and buildable and scalable state, and we need to make that a permanent thing.
Yep.
You know. And I was like, listen, I mean, honestly, like for your career, like maybe find a BA or maybe find a new person, whatever, and like build them up as a product owner, and you know, you'll kind of have a career path of your own. I would have been willing to do that, you know, had they been willing to be open to any of my ideas and talk about it, but I think that's the path that they could have gone on, at least through the ramp period or whatever. Anyway, it's derivative. I love derivatives.
Yeah.
But the point of me saying this was, he's like, well. The question he asked me was, well, why can't we just so I said we had 2 teams on the old product and 3 teams on the new product. He's like, well, why can't we just take 2 of these teams and collapse them into one team, and rather than have 3 somewhat smaller teams, so each of the 3 teams, but let me take a second, because I'm sure people are going to be like, well, I mean, if your teams are like 1 person or whatever, then blah blah blah. Okay, so the teams right now are 2 developers and 1 tester. So he's like, well, I read in the Scrum guide that teams can stretch up to like, you know,
20 people?
6, 7, 8 people. Well, even the Scrum guide says like 7 plus 2 or whatever. So he's like, well, I can take these developers and just roll them all in one team, and we can just be one team, and it will, instead of being 2 teams of 5 people each, will be one team of like 9 people, you know. Yeah, because the product owner, they don't have a Scrum Master at all anymore because they cut that position, and the product owner is shared across both. So you're basically just taking the developers and the testers and smushing them all together and being one team. And he's like, well, I think it would be advantageous to just smush them all in one team, and then we'll have less Scrum events. Okay, but those resources are not shared across Scrum events. It's just the product owner that's shared.
Yep.
So really that consolidation is just to benefit him, not to benefit the team. So first of all, let's talk about this example. In this example, what is the impact of taking 2 separate teams and smashing them together? Even though they're small, even though they're like 2 developers and 1 tester, now it goes from 2 teams that are 3 people each to 1 team that's 6 people.
Yeah, so the team dynamics are a difficult thing because it's situational, right? So if you've got a team that's mature,
Yeah.
you can possibly have an extra team member or 2, and they will figure it out.
Yeah.
You got a team that's not so well, along on their agile maturity. Even 5 people, right? Initially, you're going to have this trust that they have to establish among each other.
Well, they don't even have a Scrum Master anymore. Like the
Right.
corporate cut that position. So like,
So they have a carpet under them, right?
Yeah,
That's
they do.
very difficult. It's almost an untenable situation right there. Because that's one of the things that a Scrum Master deals with all the time is those interpersonal things, and I will get to that in a different segment of the podcast.
yeah.
But it's kind of almost not fair on the team members to be put in this situation.
Yeah.
And again, net, you're going to lose good people because they've seen it done well.
Yeah.
And this is not it. So,
yeah. I mean, that is a situation, is they're coming from a position where they are they're basically like, they work with like, I mean, let's be honest, there's like 2 developers and like a tester. It's like, they're I mean, you work with 3 people plus a product owner that just kind of like, yeah, I mean, the product owner, my relationship with that team is whenever they need something, I drop what I'm doing. It's because it's 3 people we're talking about. Whenever they need something, I drop what I'm doing. I go research and figure out and do whatever to get them what they need, and then I send it directly to them. Usually, like, we communicate through the tool. We use Jira, so we communicate directly in Jira. We tag each other or whatever, and then I drop what I'm doing when somebody from my team needs something. Research it, do whatever, figure it out, fire back a comment. Usually it's within a couple minutes, because I'm on my email and whatever. I got it on my phone, I got it on my laptop or whatever. It's all the time. I drop what I'm doing, I figure out what they need, boom, I fire it back, and then they're back to working or whatever, and then I'll get the update in the morning when I talk with them in the morning about what the summary was or whatever. But like, they don't sit through refinements about stuff they're not going to work on. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing I told him. I was like, dude, you're optimizing for one person, and then you're sub-optimizing for 6 other people.
Yeah.
or whatever. Like I was like, I understand that like you're looking to save as much time as you can because the business is just strapping you with more teams and more teams and more teams, and you're just looking to save yourself, man. Like you're on the Titanic and you're just looking for a lifeboat. You just need to save yourself somehow. Like, but that's not the way to save yourself.
No.
Like the way to save yourself is like go up and steer the ship or whatever. Like take an active role in steering the ship, man. Don't let people be like, oh, you got 5 teams. Maybe you can, I don't know, cut your retros down. From, if you have 4 retros and they're all an hour each, you can cut 15 minutes from each, and you can save yourself an hour each. Like that is not the conversation you need to have. The conversation you have is you are overworking me, and you need to bring on another product owner. So,
I think that argument extends to other roles in the team as well, right? If you're overworking the team and they're being what I call superheated, there has to be an outlet at some point. The thing's going to blow otherwise.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not recognized as such. They're just looking at it from a perspective of every team member is a cell on a spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's sad because that is exactly the mentality that causes these projects to fail.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what's happening in my case because I saw the spreadsheet. Yikes.
There's a lot of discussion out there now on the quote unquote optimal size of a team. There is really no consensus anymore. The latest Scrum Guide did away with the previous Scrum Guide's guidance, which was 7 plus or minus 2 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Now they're saying what they're saying for a good reason, by the way, and it's because there's an emphasis in the latest Scrum Guide on doing Scrum outside of software.
Yeah.
Right? So this idea of developers or the development team has been extended to beyond software. And they're saying developer as a general term here just means a producer of work. But the size of the team now is no longer applicable the way it used to be with software development.
Yeah.
So now they're saying, well, it depends. But it's somewhere between, 7 to 10 or 12, whatever. Some teams can be very effective at 12 and others not so much.
I don't believe it. I don't believe teams can be effective at 12.
Well, if you're not working in a software environment, then you're cutting down on a lot of dependencies, right? Say you're working in Agile HR. You really don't have that many dependencies anymore.
I don't believe that departments like I don't know if once you get above a certain number in a team, like the team just naturally divides into cliques or whatever. Like I don't believe that. Isn't there is it Tuckman's model that everyone goes back to for team size? Tuckman is the storming, norming, performing one. Is he the one that everyone quotes for team sizes? I can't remember.
I don't believe so. I think he's more, like you said, is on the
how people work together.
Yeah.
Like there's some research that quotes the team size, like the best team size.
Oh, you're talking about the Harvard researce?
Is it?
Where they're saying the ideal team size is 4?
Something like that.
Like
4, 5, 6, something like that. I can't remember what it is.
That's a research piece that was done by Harvard.
Oh, is it? Like I need to get that. And read through it, and probably that would have been a good one to inject into this conversation, because one of the things that I want to talk about is when is the correct size to consolidate and or divide a team. Let's start with dividing a team, because that's probably the easier way. How do you know that it's time to divide a team?
So anytime you see any signs of a team kind of stretching at the seams, and that sounds generic enough, but let's say in the regular Scrum events, you're starting to run out of time, you're starting to get contention, and you're not able to reach conclusion, right? Things like that. People are saying, let's take that offline. Well, you've just spent an hour discussing something, and now you're going to spend more time discussing things offline.
Or your events are difficult to hold to 15 minutes. Like that's
right. So there are a lot of these process-oriented signs that will say, yeah, the team's perhaps too big, right? And the other side of it is the work, right? So you may end up with a situation where the teams aren't getting enough throughput because collectively they have reached their ideal maximum.
Yeah.
And they've actually personified it. So you say you got 9 people, right, or 11 people. They're producing as much as they can at this point, but that's a status quo. They've reached the plateau. If you split them up into 2 teams, they start again where that original team did, and they will go up.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is they're going to way exceed that plateau as individual teams of more than one. Right? It could be 2, it could be 3, whatever. So there are signs, telltale signs that tell you perhaps the team is a little too big here,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What? So what are you looking? You looking for a plateau like their velocity? What are you looking for specifically?
I'm not a big fan of that measure.
I'm not
but-
either. I'm just throwing something out because I can't.
Yeah. So I mean, it could be an indicator, but I would be looking at the value that the team's delivering sprint on sprint in terms of business value.
Yeah.
And if you've reached a plateau, so before we go there, I'm a believer that particular curve never flattens if you're doing things right.
Mhm.
It will always go up. It's just a question of the gradient,
Mhm.
right? But it will never flatten. If you're doing things right, it may go up. It may take 2 or 3 sprints, but it's actually upward bound the whole time.
Right.
And if it's not, then something is wrong. That's another indicator of the process or the team size or the dynamics are just stagnating here. So I think business value is something that you can keep an eye on and say, we've really not improved on it, right? Look at a trend. Don't look at individual data points, but look at a trend.
How do you track? Like everyone is gonna know how to track velocity. How do you track business value?
Excellent question. So one of the things you can do is so velocity is something that is oriented from the team. The team estimates the work.
Right.
If they feel undue pressure to increase the velocity, as you said earlier, a 5 is now an 8.
It's game
3 is
system.
now-
Yeah,
So
of course.
it's all gamed.
Yeah.
But so you want to take that variable out. Business value to me comes from the business, not the team.
Mm-hmm.
So given a product backlog, you're going to ask somebody, the PO, to say, great, you've got this product backlog and you've sequenced it, prioritized it, whatever, that's awesome. Now, every single one of these doesn't have the same unique priority. What I mean by that is item number 4 isn't necessarily more important than item 5 and 6 and 7. In real life, you might say, well, 4 and 8 are just as important from the perspective of value to the business, right? The reason why they are in that order is because it's a time sequence thing. You want to have 4 because something else is dependent on it. So get that done first. So I think, having the business go through your product backlog and assign every item a score. Pick your scale. Doesn't matter. Let the team pick a scale, including the PO. Most commonly, it's like a 1 to 10 or whatever, right? Jira allows it. I know Azure DevOps allows it, etc. Pick that scale and ask the product owner to rank all of these things, right, based on that scale. But don't get too hung up. Is it an 8? Is it a 9? Is not worth a debate. It's high value, right? Mm-hmm. So to that end, teams that are not mature, not very mature in doing this, they could just be better off by saying, let's just go with HML, high, medium, low.
Yeah,
that's
high,
fine.
medium, low, yeah.
And then you can go a few sprints out and then say, well, let's get to the next level.
Yeah.
So I think if you do that, you can then say, okay, the sprint's over now. Here's what we delivered. Let's tally up all the business value points and say, we delivered X number of points of business value. It is arbitrary, but it's not, because it's the PO who defined it, not the team.
Yeah, right.
And then over a trend, you could say, well, the team is really doing this, right? Or it's flat, right? Or it's going up a little. What can we do to improve on that?
Yeah.
And those are kinds of things that you could pick up at your retro with your team.
Yeah. Do you like? So this is a PO that defines it. So is a PO using Like I don't know this. I almost don't want to go down this road because we're supposed to be talking about teams right now.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a whole bunch of methods for prioritization for POs, like the Kano model,
Right.
Moscow model,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. Like
Yep.
like there's a whole bunch of things that they could do. Like a high, medium, low seems like if you didn't know what to do or you didn't have something in place, like you just like and you were in a system that was like, I don't know, wasn't really a great tool. Could be any tool. Could be Jira. I mean, it could be any tool.
Could be Excel.
Could be Excel or Jira.
Yeah, it could be stickies on the wall or Jira.
Or Jira.
Yeah.
And you would just put like 1, 2, 3, like high, medium, low, 1, 2, 3, whatever.
Sure.
Like like that. That seems like a pretty straightforward, pretty simple way to get started. To say, this story is. But I mean, at that point, like, what's to keep them from being like everything's high priority all the time? Like everything's priority 1 forever, all the time.
That's classic, isn't it?
Yeah. Of course, like that.
Well, the other thing I hear is this is priority 1. This other one is priority 1A. This is 1B,
Also
1C, right?
Yeah.
There can only be one priority 1.
There can be only one.
Yeah. I think it comes down to educating the PO to, just say, listen, you can't have more than one priority 1. So if he says or she says this is a 1A, 1B, 1C, then say, great, that's fine. Now, out of 1A, 1B, 1C, which is the one that you really want first, right? Which one matters to you this sprint? Which one can you live without? And get him or her to understand that there's only one priority 1. There's only one priority 2. They have to stack rank them.
Yeah.
And that comes with, a little bit of coaching from the coaches and the Scrum Masters.
Yeah, I think I said it before, like maybe in our first episode. I was like, this is the thing I like about SAFe is that when you start, you level your business value with everything. You can't use the same number. Like it's like, if you're taking 10 items, it's number 1 through 10 or whatever your business value. And that may not be the priority because of other things, dependencies, whatever, whatever else, blockers, other things. But like, you're basically forced to have the business users come into the room when development teams are working, planning or whatever, and actively participate in prioritization of stuff, and have the conversation back and forth. And that's a very valuable thing.
I agree with you, but I also believe that there's a distinction between priority and business value here, right? So you could have multiple things that have differing priorities, but let's say they all have the same business value.
Yeah.
Then the team needs to focus on the priority because that's what's indicated, and vice versa. But yeah, I do agree. In SAFe, it's pretty simple at the PI planning level to say, okay, product owner, rank these items and assign them business value. These are the must-haves for you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, here are a couple of things that you might want or not want, but assign those business values too, but they're below a horizontal line that says, we're not committing to these, right? They're below. And if we get them, that's gravy. If we don't, no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
So and everything needs to then be accounted for at the end of the PI. You would go back in and say, you said you wanted these things. Here's what we delivered. Go back and add a column next to it and say business value is, let's say, 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
What do you think you actually received, right? Was it a 3? If you got everything you asked for, it's a 3. If you got almost everything, maybe it's a 2, right? And so that column needs to be added. And when you add that, you now have what was desired, what was actually achieved, and you can figure out an efficiency score, right? And say, this is what the team is hitting. The only thing with this model that I think is kind of like potentially something you could poke at is you've got one mind, the product owner who's doing this,
Right. Yeah.
which is good and bad. It's good because it takes the variability out, right? It's bad because they're only thinking about it from a single dimension, right? It's their priorities, it's their business values, and that's okay if you have constancy of product owner,
Right.
PI over PI, and a PI is X number of sprints. So if you have churn in your PO, that's where the whole thing falls down.
Yeah, like that. Dude, like that was gonna be one of the things. Like changes to teams was the actual topic that I started with, and that was gonna be one of the things. Like you can change. Like if you're changing a developer, like let's say a developer leaves your team, you bring on another developer or whatever. let's even assume where you're changing a developer and you have the advantage of having like a little bit of an overlap between when you bring on a new developer and the old developer. You're still going to expect a dip in your velocity.
Yeah, you're going to get that dip. I mean, not only because the new developer is onboarding, right?
Yeah.
But because your existing developers are assisting him get up to speed.
Right.
Because he's going to be asking questions, or she, right? And so their bandwidth is reduced that much. So yes, there's going to be a dip. What I'd be looking for is, again, a pattern. So is that dip continuing from this sprint to the next? It really shouldn't, right? So yeah, there are telltale signs, again, that you would look for. But expect that. And if you have churn where it's more than one, so one person or a team member change puts the team back into forming.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how long they've been together.
Right. Yeah.
And that is something that's not very commonly understood.
Yeah. But like you skipped ahead. You skipped the team member. You skipped the team member, which is like anybody on a team. Like not just. I'm talking specifically about a developer. I'm not talking about a product owner changing. Like that's the situation I'm in right now, which is the product owner is changing, and like. The issue that I've run into is the product owner changed. I probably have. It's probably not a great. Actually, it's probably both not. Let me switch camera. It's probably both not a great situation, but it probably also, like for the examples on the internet, it's probably also a great example because the product owner changed and the business decided they didn't need a scrum master. They were going to pivot the role and let people take it over on the teams. They did that both at the same time. They decided to change the PO and eliminate the full-time scrum master that ran all the teams, or the scrum master that facilitated all the teams. I don't know, ran all the teams.
Those are significant changes.
Yeah, well, they decided to do all that within a one sprint kind of deal. So I'm like, well, basically so what happened at there's a bunch of after effects that happened because of that. Like some developers quit or whatever. They were like, well, I don't know what's going on and I don't feel good about this working environment, so I'm just gonna I'll give my 2 weeks or whatever. Because the way the market is right now, people really don't need to sit around and I know. It's people don't really need to sit around while leadership takes wild shots in the dark or whatever. They can just be like, well, I'll just get another job in 2 weeks and I'll be good, dude. That aside, let's pretend you have a stability of developers on your team and it's just you change your PO and forget that you change your Scrum Master. You change the PO.
Yep.
Okay. To me, okay, so this might just be my thing because I'm coming off of being a PO, so it might just be fresh in my mind. Oh, that's so annoying being right there. Man, I didn't realize how annoying it was. I don't know how long that's been on camera. Sorry, totally not cool. This might be my thing about coming off of being a PO, but I feel that changing your PO on a sprint, that to me seems way more impactful / damaging than changing any individual developer. Not to minimize the role of changing developer. Obviously, you change if you're changing a developer and you have your go-to person or your senior developer in a team or the person who does releases all the time or whatever. Obviously, it's going to make a big impact changing anyone on the team. Yeah. However, because of my current experience, the way I feel is if you change a PO, you're basically changing the person that's at the heart of all your stories and your acceptance criteria and what you accept and what you don't. It's such a jarring experience for anyone on that team changing the PO, man.
Absolutely. So it takes time for a team to get to a point where they work well with the PO, right? Yeah. Establish that rapport. And it's both ways, right? It's both ways. The team being able to understand the level of detail, the prioritization that they go through, etc. And then from the product owner, to establish the trust with the team, being able to say, here's what I want, you figure out the how. You figure out how long it's going to take and all the sizing, etc. Now you change that, right? So somebody new comes in and the team starts all over again. That is a huge disruption. Yeah. And it's a disruption that cannot be overcome in one sprint.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So but it's commonly misunderstood. People look at the previous metric and say, We're going to just keep going on that trajectory.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely not going to keep going on that trajectory.
I feel the same way about changing the Scrum Master. I mean, like, you're basically changing the person whose role it is to be in front of all of to intercept anything coming at the team that is going to damage or slow down their productivity, or I mean, we can change that into whatever metric you want to, but basically the person who's going to intercept anything that's impairing the team's psychological safety, going to get in front of that, going to shield the team from that, going to help the team get over whatever blockers they have and move them along, and be like, you're going to change that person, or at the absolute worst, eliminate that person, and then just put it up on the team and be like, oh, all right, well, the collective team's got to figure it out now. But yeah, like eliminating the Scrum Master, the person who's doing all the blocking and tackling for the team, the person who's taking care of all the in-betweens, letting the developers go back to what they want to do, you know what I mean? Just sitting in their cube and coding all day, and just being like, get that super, super deep focus, deflecting things when they come on, like, then being like, oh, you don't need this person helping you anymore. You don't need help anymore. You got this.
Yeah.
What a damaging thing. Like,
I know, it is extremely damaging. So, it's a metaphor for you. You got a bunch of people on a rowing boat, right? This is like the Hawaii 5-0 rowing boat, right? Almost hear the music in my head. Yeah. So all these people are rowing in unison, right? And there's somebody keeping the time, and that's the Scrum Master.
Yeah.
And there's also, on a big ship, you have somebody scanning the horizon, right? For danger, whatever, icebergs. But on my rowboat, it's the same person doing that. So they're keeping the drum beat. They're also looking for impediments and avoiding them, right, with the team.
Right.
Now you're going to say, okay, team, we're going to do away with this person. You figure it out. So these people are rowing, and one of them has to stop rowing to get up and stand up. So they stop. What happens to his counterpart or her counterpart? I mean, it's just chaos.
You got to row faster while the other person goes and takes a
Otherwise
bathroom
the boat
break
goes
or whatever.
Off kilter, right, and goes around in circles.
Oh man,
it's just so damaging, and people don't appreciate that, right? They will find out pretty quick what that looks like, because every person has different skills, right? So these are team members, let's just say. Right? The development team in the new Scrum Guide is everybody.
Yeah.
So pick somebody out of the team, a actual developer who actually codes, or a QA person or a BA person. Say, you are the Scrum Master this sprint.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to figure out, the day-to-day. They're trying to figure out what metrics to track, etc. But before they get there, their turn's over, right? So, okay, they're going to sit down and go back to coding, and the next person's, it's a recipe for disaster, right? I mean, nothing good can come out of this. I would rather they say, we don't need a Scrum Master, fine. Pick somebody and make them the Scrum Master now, and say, we have one less dev team member. Right, that's fine. We can live with that. We can adjust our forecasts.
But if let me try to support the role of the penny pinching executive for a second, and let me go down the road of because people are going to be screaming at the monitor to themselves or whatever, their tiny phone screen to themselves right now, which is like, well, I don't need a Scrum Master. I can just train one of my developers and have the developer do the role. And if it's like the where they would be completely in the right to scream at me over the internet about this, good luck, would be I'm going to train all of my developers to be Scrum Masters. So send them the equal training so they understand the process. They understand the process, cool. We talked about this last time too. But then one developer on one team, we're going to assume none of our resources is shared for a second. And one developer on one team is going to serve as the Scrum Master for that team. Maybe they're the senior. Maybe I'm already okay taking an overhead for this person. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to take a 20% overhead. This is my team lead developer. He's a developer. He's also a team lead. He's going to take a 20% overhead. He'll conduct all the Scrum events. He'll block and tackle for the team. He'll do all that stuff. He should be able to do that because he's a team lead or whatever. Maybe he's a senior developer. Maybe he has more advanced development skills. Whatever. Maybe he works faster than the rest. It's knowledge work. Maybe you work faster. For the purposes of this, it doesn't really matter. Maybe I'm okay with that 20% overhead. But again, like if it's a one developer on one team and then you have other developers on other teams and they're the Scrum Master for that one team and they don't share any teams, I am almost on the point. I'm almost to the point where I will agree with the executive, be like, I'm willing to try that model out and see if it works. Like I'd be interested to see how, as long as you have somebody who is over all the Scrum Masters, who is who has the knowledge and the experience to understand what they're doing on their teams and can coach them, can help them. If you have support in the organization, that's where I'm going with this. Not hierarchy or whatever. I'd say over. That's probably a poor choice of words. If they have support, somebody who can observe them occasionally, help them along, give them some advice, coach them, help mentor them, whatever. I kind of support this. That's not the situation we're talking about. The situation we're talking about is as a full-time Scrum Master who has several teams that they jump back and forth between, and that's the situation. We're not talking about one single person who's dedicated to one single team. Although we could talk about one single Scrum Master who is not a developer, who's dedicated to that one team, and what do they do with all that? I feel that's the executive behind the back of my neck, who's just looking to ask me questions and yell at me. We talked about that last time. What are they doing with their 40 hours a week or whatever?
Yeah. So here's the thing. All right, if you've got a Scrum Master who is handling more than one team, they're not very effective, because that switching cost between the two teams is as high as 20%, maybe more.
Well, it's 20%, so it'd be 40%.
40%, 40%, because it's switching back and forth.
It'd be 40%, and I'll go along with you for the purposes of listening to the discussion. But as an executive, I'm willing to accept for a non-technical resource. I'm willing to accept a 40% reduction in their efficiency, but at least they're still at 60%, whatever they need to do. I'm not impacting any of my developers for that. So if we're talking about task switching, I'd rather task switch non-developer than one of my developers. I mean, if I have to task switch somebody.
It sounds easy on the face of it, but are you not impacting the developers? Because what happens on both teams if developers have impediments? Now this poor Scrum Master
I understand what you're saying.
Right? So I know we'll get to this in a separate segment with, what does a Scrum Master do in a day?
Yeah.
But I heard somewhere that a good Scrum Master can handle two teams, but a great Scrum Master should only handle one, right? Yeah. And having done a role a little bit, I can tell you, your days are busy with one team.
Yeah.
So with two teams, you can manage, quote unquote, but it's suboptimal, right? So yes, you are impacting throughput of the team, right? Whether you like it or not, you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And it will come out in the metrics.
Yeah, see, this is the thing about it. We're talking about a Scrum Master, okay? And people have a hard time conceptualizing, especially people that don't work with Scrum Masters. They have a hard time conceptualizing, what a great Scrum Master with one team. But what do they do with it all the time? It doesn't seem to be a full-time job or whatever. And again, we'll do a whole episode on the day in the life of a Scrum Master, talk about what you do each day. However, let me pivot this for a second. And be well, does your team have a test resource? Okay? Does your team have a test resource? Because I can get on the same high horse and make the same BS argument about what does your tester do all day? What do they do the first 2 days of the sprint when your developers are deep in the code and they haven't produced anything to test yet?
What an excellent question.
Well then why not have your testers dedicated to this other team for the first 2 days of the sprint, and then dedicated to the other team or better yet, why don't they work on one team 1 week and one team another week? This little this bean counting nonsense, I can take this very, very far.
You could. I mean, look, in an ideal world, right, you could make the case that, the testers are not being productive in the first few days of the sprint, but that's a fallacy. They really, in Agile testing, should be involved not only at day one, but prior to that. They should be engaged in the planning, in the estimation of the work.
Right.
They should be engaged on day one when tasks are being created. If your team is creating tasks, right, they will be creating their own tasks. Creating test cases, test suites, etc. Right, and so a mature team would have a tester with a developer or developers swarming together. Right, I can tell you some of the teams I'm working with now do this, and those teams are head and shoulders above the other teams because the testers aren't waiting for something to be chucked over the wall at them and then look at it and go, oh, you've missed this little bit in the AC, right? No, they were there, shoulder to shoulder, so to speak. So I think that does a few things for you. Not only is the quality of the finished developer work is high, or higher than it otherwise would be. The other thing it does is the tester is very confident now about how this thing was developed.
Right.
There's no questions around that. And at the end of the sprint, I've seen this firsthand. At the end of the sprint, developers are done with their sprint load, etc., and they're looking around. We're done. Good luck, testers. That scenario is very dangerous. So what I've seen really work well is this swarming idea, where developers say, "Well, we're done developing. Now I see you have a whole bunch of test suites to exercise. How can we help?" And those test suites, if they're written well, anybody could pick them up. and run them.
Oh man, I'm like, dude, I'm like sorry. I probably should have let you keep that. That's the thing I started noticing about myself is like, I jump in way too early.
I've seen some really good testers really run with automation up front. Rather than play catch up later.
That's a big thing.
And if you're so it kind of depends to a certain degree. It's contextual, but if your application is monolithic, then they can do certain things ahead of time. If your application is using microservices, they can do so. These developers are working away at actually creating the code, but the testers in almost like a simultaneous mode. They are creating API test cases, all of that stuff, right? So that needs to be done. They can't wait till later. Your sprint is only so long, right? So I think good testers are engaged throughout the sprint, but they start even before that.
I think it's a huge boon to an organization to be able to draw in their testers to help them with everything that I'm doing now as a product owner, where I'm writing requirements and I'm doing like business analysis type tasks, stuff like that. I feel like the testers, they're natural to be able to do all that kind of work. To basically extend the capability of the product owner near the start of the sprint to kind of like figure that kind of stuff out. The more heavily involved they are, the easier it is for them to understand what to test. And I would take that a step further to say the more involved. I don't know a way to say it. The more
engaged.
The more engaged with the business that the that we'll call them test team, even though they're not really a team. The more engaged with the business the testers feel. They feel they're closer to the business in that model than they are to the tech teams or development teams or whatever.
Yeah, I think if your organization has an approach where you're prototyping stuff, testers are ideal for that because often what happens is it originates with UX and largely it's a facade that they create, right? And they're trying to create this user experience. But if you have testers involved at that point with the UX people, they're going to be able to say, this is great. How do you test that? How do you know it's going to actually work, right? And that's really, really powerful, especially when you talk about things like accessibility requirements and things like that, which are, I know a lot of times people consider those as NFRs, but they're critical. And so if you don't pay attention to that up front, you're going to have to retrofit that. Right, and so it's pay me now, pay me later.
Boy, I want to wrap this topic, but I feel we've hit on something that could be a whole separate session, which is ways to engage the testers where they truly become an extension of product ownership and the business, rather than any kind of checking boxes or whatever from the development teams, which is that's probably like the worst trap that a tester can get stuck in, is just you tell me the acceptance criteria and I'll just check off the box or whatever. Like that, you're not really adding value doing that. I mean, anyone can do that. I've pulled up the product in demos and checked off acceptance criteria by what they show me in the demo. That's not value to have somebody else do that. Like the value is that they are asking questions and that they're out there acting like a representative of the customer, much like the product owner would do. I feel like the summation of this like this is not what I wanted to come to the summary of this topic. It was all about teams and what happens when you change people on teams, when to consolidate, when to divide teams and stuff like that. But we've kind of hit on another topic that I really should write down, because sort of transforming your testers to become representatives of the business and of product is something that I think is really missed.
Totally, I agree. I think it's missed because testers are looked at people that come in later in the pipeline.
Overhead. They're all overhead as well, yeah.
Yeah, they are overhead, yeah.